Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Connecting Caregivers Conference number 3 with me, Linda Burhans, the gal who cares for the caregivers with love, laughter, and lessons learned. I am so excited and joyful and grateful that you're here today. I always say there's plenty of room around the Connecting Caregivers table, whether it's the conferences, the radio show, the Tuesday tips, the YouTube. I'm just here to bring you help and hope and some education. I want to say, first of all, thank you to the wonderful partners we have, because this conference would not be able to be free for caregivers without them. So thank you so much to Arden Courts of Seminole, Largo, Palm Harbor, and Tampa. And thank you to elder law attorney Sean Scott. And also thank you to Accent Care / Seasons Hospice. Like I said, if it was not for our partners, we would not be able to bring this conference here to you today. And I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Cate McCarty. I have learned so much from Cate over the last 15 years. I just love hearing her speak. Every time I do, I learn something new. And Cate doesn't just talk the talk, she walks the walk. So welcome, my friend. I'm so glad you're here today, and let's get started.
Thank you. It's delighted. Thank you so much, Linda, for including me. I love it. And I got to be very creative. So let me get my little PowerPoint going here. I'm going to need a share screen, so that might be helpful for the PowerPoint. So I was a big reader as a child. And, now as I do more research, I realize that we have what we call acute childhood experiences. And for me, the books were a good getaway. And I'm still looking for the ability to share my screen. When I got the opportunity to look at, what do I want to talk about today? Fairy tales. I think, when you read Hansel and Gretel, for example, or you read any of the old fairy tales, and I will be honest, I'm going to stick with the old stuff because that's how I'm wired. And I want to make sure that we're seeing just the screen. Am I right? Are you seeing just the screen? If anybody could, Linda, if you can check in on that for me. So when I think of those stories, that they were so dreadful and gruesome that it made what was going on in childhood a little easier. And my childhood wasn't horrible. But what we know now from years of working with dementia and behaviors is sometimes the traumas of the past come back and visit us, right? So what I was going to talk to today is I looked at fairy tales and how they intersect. And I think I have been speaking the speak for a long time. I've worked over 40 years. My sister tells me not to tell how many because it would make me very old, but you probably see that. But I've worked a long time in dementia care, and I've had a lot of training and a lot of hands-on. So I kind of thought I had the answers. And it wasn't until it got real personal. I had father-in-laws with Alzheimer's, and that so many of the answers applied, and I was able to navigate. And now Mike has a diagnosis, a vague one, dementia of the Alzheimer's type, and it doesn't fit any of those categories. So it's much more like a dark forest. And I think when you look at the story of Hansel and Gretel, and I had this sort of makes you salivate if you haven't had your breakfast this morning, but they were thinking ahead. Brother and sister walking a path. You see my path behind me. And they put out breadcrumbs. And I think in the early days, when, with all my experience, the traditional Alzheimer's-like trajectory, the breadcrumbs worked. They stayed. But now, when you look at the statistics, we have over 100 varieties of dementia. Alzheimer's represents just a skosh over 50%. We're seeing people younger, and we're seeing all that individuality come through the pike. So those early breadcrumbs that worked are not working so much anymore. Fairy tales in general were written as a way to get children to be good. Right? They were moralistic. They were romanticized. Usually somebody gets saved. Sadly, it was always a damsel in distress. If you look at like Red Robin Hood, or Little Red Riding Hood, and their moral tales, which were trying to make a society be better. I think in a lot of ways we have some romanticized tales of Alzheimer's. One that comes to mind, and as a teacher of Alzheimer's and dementia, related dementias, always so up, and how many of the students would pick The Notebook as the one that they were going to review and apply. And The Notebook is, I'll be honest, Nicholas Sparks is not my favorite favorite writer. It's a very romanticized view. If we had all the money in the world to throw at the situation and set up a private home with all these caregivers, then maybe everything would be better. And of course, The Notebook did touch on the bad things as well. But I think we also have told ourselves, those of us who have been in the business a long time, some tales. And I know, looking back, prior to being a spousal caregiver, I spun some tales. I'm much more objective and careful with my antidotes or prescriptions for success in this, because we have so many unique people and not everybody's doing that old school Alzheimer's trajectory. And Linda, you speak to this. Tam Cummings speaks to this. Rachel Wonderland, we all speak to, if you know one person who has dementia, you know one person. We all bring our background and our expectations. And sadly, sometimes we're looking for heroes where there aren't any. And don't get me started on where that is. But there are kind of three truths that I think we can all agree on. Spouses, you may have been the handsome prince or Tinkerbell, depending on your gender. But now you get to play a completely different role. Sometimes you're the evil stepmother. I hate that one, and I get to do it a lot. Sometimes you're Wendy, which is not, that's okay. I mean, I love Tinkerbell, but as I age, Wendy's a more familiar territory for me. And sometimes, every once in a while, you get to be Glenda, the Good Witch. These romanticized tales, of course, have been passed down for good. Well, you know, if you look at, they were scary. And I think I've shared before on one of our past conferences, Linda, one of my favorite statements came out of a radio advertisement that was in St. Thomas when Mike and I were living on the boat, and there were some changes going on that were hard to figure out what to do with, and we didn't have any really didn't have any diagnosis. And the woman said, when you're in the street fight of your life, well, in a lot of ways, when you look at Little Red Riding Hood, you look at Hansel and Gretel, they're shoved in an oven. We're talking some serious street fight, right? Kind of loops around to your intro music that is so much trend. And I love that it is contemporary, upbeat. And, you know, when you look back, today's children, they don't know these old fairy tales. That's what I bring to the table. Perhaps you will remember some of them, but there are, even though they were gruesome and unimaginable, there were some decent take homes for survival, at least. And ideally, we are hoping that thrive. But, you know, and we look at the deep, dark forest, because sometimes with that diagnosis, that's what it feels like. It's like, oh no, what now? You know, you don't know what is around the corner. And then sometimes you do think you know what's around the corner, and that's even scarier, right? So this isn't your grandma. And if you remember Red Riding Hood, oh my, what big teeth you have. Well, you know, the teeth don't change. The ears become less attuned for sure. But it might be the memory is shorter. It might be the fuse, that temperament, the anger, anxiety, agitation fuse is much shorter. It might be that suddenly your extrovert became an introvert. Maybe even your handsome prince becomes the bum from Mystery Date. If you all had the Mystery Date game, you know of which I speak. Things change. Remember Snow White's 7 dwarfs? Well, I think that's very appropriate if we list their names. Sometimes we actually work with these every day. Duck. We have Duck, Grumpy, Bashful, Sleepy, Happy, Sneezy, and Dopey. Sometimes they're in my little world every day, all of them. Sometimes often a repetition. The person that was always a flirt is now extremely flirty, and the no more bashful, so that doesn't hit on there. Always smarter, always the Doc. Much shorter fuse. So Grumpy is big. Maybe your person, your care partner was never a mover and a shaker. Some of these titles that I'm listing are denial spots, because it's like, well, he's always been that way. That's not new. He's always been that way. And people from the outside will say, oh no, it's worse. And sometimes you're willing and able to say, this is worse. And sometimes we see those kinds of changes. They're sometimes subtle, sometimes greatly large. We talk about the 4 A's of behavior: anxiety, apathy, agitation, and aggression. Those are classic. They've been applied to Alzheimer's and really all forms of behavioral problems and symptoms resulting from a dementia diagnosis. What we also know, particularly in the nursing research, which I always find the best because they're the front line, is that behaviors are often based in an unmet need. That's a double-edged sword, because as the chief guide for our path of dementia, sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I can take that very personally, somewhat based in my own childhood stuff. But if we look at unmet need, we can see that sometimes sneezy, okay, it's allergy season. Maybe we need to take an allergy med. That's even for ourselves, right? Grumpy, did we have that nap yesterday that we're usually reliant on? Or was so much squeezed into a day that therefore we have the sparks flying at a heartbeat, that the fuse just was very short? That's what we mean by unmet need. Sometimes it's pain. And of course, near and dear to my heart is the reality that it's not always Mike's unmet need. Sometimes it's my unmet need. And this is where that whole, I constantly think of my dad's level and that little bubble. And I always thought he was so fussy that he needed to have that bubble on the little level, carpenter's level, exactly between the 2 lines. But this goes to unmet need. If I haven't had enough sleep, if I really need to get away, I don't even know what that looks like. One of my caregivers said she'd go to Publix and walk up and down the aisle for an hour. That was her respite. So I need to learn more how to do that kind of thing. And sometimes my work is my respite, but the getaway, sometimes grumpy, dopey, sneezy. And I lost the 7 list. They're from me. So the dwarfs are alive and well on both sides. The old idea, I remember one of my millennials children saying, you do you and I'll do me. Well, unfortunately, that balance has changed, because sometimes the breakdown in the brain on his side makes it hard for him to do him, right? And sometimes I have to pick up the slack. So that again goes back to meeting both needs. No longer not your grandma, not your handsome prince. And it's sort of for both of us, because we can't be Tinkerbell and Wendy anymore. And we'll go more into that in case you didn't remember those stories. Here we go. So once you were Tinkerbell flits in and out and does wonderful things, kind of like a romantic fantasy date woman, right? And Wendy, she's always pulling the Neverland boys together and trying to mother them. In fact, there's even a J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, describes this mother image very well, and making sure they have what they need to eat, making sure they're safe, making sure they're having a happy life, but making sure they get enough sleep, all those things, they become part and parcel of being a caregiver. When I look at the men that join our support groups, particularly generationally, they weren't set up to do some of these things. Perish the thought. I look at my own children and I think, oh geez, we better fix this, because my poor son-in-law, they're not going to have anybody fixing their meals. And that is a very gender biased statement, I realize, but there are roles that we play. The roles have changed. So when you look at Tinkerbell, well, she's a good time girl. I used to be the good time girl. Sometimes I'm the mean girl. Sometimes I'm the one that's like, no, we're not doing that. I hate being the mean girl. When Teepa Snow talks about fight, flight, or freeze, I'm the freezer. I don't fight. In fact, I spent a good portion of my time being the runner. Can't be the runner anymore, right? In sickness and health, so no running. But there's this, and then there's the continued change. I don't know if this happened for Wendy, because I didn't go back and reread Peter Pan, but the boys were in trouble a lot, and she showed up to sort of guide them in line. As this dementia disease, whatever form of dementia it is, as it progresses, we know it is progressive neurodegeneration. No matter what 100 of the 100 plus types it is, that's what we know. So we know there's going to be continued change, which means as a care partner, our role changes. We may have been more of a silent partner in the past, and now we're like, owner operator, right? You're just like a figurehead on the board kind of shift in that partnership. When we look at this continued change, we often can wrap our head around the term time travel, retrogenesis, returning to the beginning. That's what retrogenesis means. And I'll look in a minute, but we go back, we're doing the reverse in childhood development. So if we were to look at my favorite and easiest to manage and most represented in research scale for staging dementias, this was put out in the 80s originally. This is a 90, is 85, the version I'm looking at now. It was written for Alzheimer's because related dementias, that's all we knew. We had related dementias back then. But this scale is often applied as a template for change as people advance in the disease. And most of us, I'll be honest, we don't even notice until about stage 4. Now, if you're really sharp, you might notice mild cognitive impairment. In my case, we did get here early, not because I was really sharp, but more because I was in a very intense living situation. We were alone in the Caribbean, and I put alone in quotes, but you don't know these other boaters, right? And I could see changes in how he was operating the systems I knew nothing about. Had we been, land-based and he was still going off to work and he may have slipped on a bill or two, I might not have noticed. But because we were in this very tense situation, mild cognitive impairment was a diagnosis given to us. The interesting thing about mild cognitive impairment is about, current research says about 35% of those people will never advance beyond to these other stages. Well, hallelujah, right? We all wish for that. Unfortunately, that has not proven the case for us in our little partnership. We are more here. We're playing in the 4 and 5 zone. These are color coded because we're going to look at Piaget, which is a childhood development specialist. So when we look at this chart, And you may be looking at it for your loved one right now, and you can certainly contact me and I will send you these slides. But when you look at this, the most important for those of us managing and partnering and trying to be a good Wendy is this column right here. Because what this addresses is that reverse development. So we could say decline. It's kind of a negative word, but we know that we're going backwards, right? We're going time traveling backwards. So sometimes that person that you know and love and have always been, they've been very on top of things, and they're up here at normal aging, which some of us question what that really is. But sometimes they respond emotionally or cognitively at the level of an 8 to 12-year-old. I have a 10-year-old at my house most of the time. I have a 10-year-old that takes umbrage to the 7-year-old grandchild sometimes, doesn't get that he's the adult. There's almost like a competition. It's hard, right? It's hard to deal with, but knowing this chart and knowing where we're at helps me. Sometimes in this, and I have to say, I'm the queen of denial. I'm the plumber with the leaky pipes. I'll be honest. Needs help selecting clothes. I'm still resisting on that. I'm like, come on now, dude, you've got like patents and stuff. You should be able, but sometimes that's not true. It was never a strong suit. Also, something to remember, if the person was never really driven to do a certain thing, they're not suddenly going to become driven as their brain deteriorates, as their brain changes. And this is a very quick and dirty, this characteristics, this is a much bigger, it's called the global deterioration scale, same orchestration, same number of stages, and it has much more in-depth stuff. But I like to use this one for training because I think sometimes when we come home, this is our most recent example, from an 8-hour drive to the Adirondacks in which the car was malperforming GPS, that we rely on GPS. And there was some loss of sleep. And there was, of course, the whole routine change that, yes, there's going to be trouble that's more like the 5 and 4-year-old zone. There's going to be a response to me. And in my case, very language related, so that no abstracts could be spoken. So, and as you look here, from 6E to 7F is when hospice, 6E is palliative care, hospice palliative care. Not all states have that. Some do. Florida, we are blessed. Maryland, not so much. New York, not at all. So just to give you some context, but when we look at that, we're saying traditional hospice is 7C to F. Now, yes, you can graduate from hospice. There is nobody that has a crystal ball that says this is going to happen in 12 to 15 months. And to be honest, as a dementia coach and as a recreation therapist and a PhD, we all kind of hope for another comorbidity, another disease trajectory that would overlay and complicate this and maybe make it not so grueling and not such a scary forest in the world of fairy tales, right? So I think I covered the mild cognitive impairment, and I'm going to say the big bad wolf is at the door right in these stages. And some people would say he's already come in. It depends on your tolerance. Some people have never been in healthcare. Some people have never had children. You put never had children, never been around children with these changes, that's a lot. And those are the folks that really do benefit so much from Linda's support, my support, Tam's, Tipa's, whatever we can put out there to help them navigate this really makes a big difference. So we're traveling through neurodegeneration back to early childhood. And when we look at returning to Neverland, because a lot of ways that's what's happening. We'll look at Piaget, and keeping in mind, because of the over 100 varieties, because of our personalities, our training, our acute childhood experiences, our traumas, our biography. These don't all, none of these things are exact templates that are going to meet your scenario, right? There's a lot more that goes into it. In a lot of ways, I feel like we become a tailor. I should have pulled up a fairy tale about the tailor or the cobbler, because we have to change our approaches. But when you look at Piaget, and there are downsides to him, but he's still considered the primary childhood development specialist. We see some trends. And if you were to match up, you see I have the FAST scales. This is hopefully all of us showed up with a formal operational end of things, so that 12 years and onward, we're supposed to understand the world, hypothetical thinking, and scientific reasoning. Now, this is, I can give you a good example of this in my world. I have learned that I do not hypothetically suggest, maybe we'll take a cruise in March. We should look into that, because we don't have hypothetical thinking anymore. We have logical thinking, and we, while Kate is at work, will get online and we'll find the exact amazing cruise. Good news, I've been negative enough on booking it that, although I do have a $600 bidet from this hypothetical problem, and it's a lovely bidet, but the good news is he doesn't go on the big ticket items, but the disappointment is so horrendous. It's palpable, because you said a cruise in March. The hypothetical part, gone. Some of you may relate to this, right? And as this is going backwards, I know the arrows are going this way, because, Piaget is looking at development and we're looking at decline. So we have to change our arrows. But logical thinking, sometimes that is so missing. Like, it's feasible to combine errands. No, not really. I'll do that, and then I'll do that other thing another time. And some of that's because the brain can't hold it all, and lists don't seem to be looked at anymore. I'll never forget, in the traditional Alzheimer's model, we would say, hey, out of sight, out of mind. Like, why can't he find the glasses that have been in the same shelf for 35 years? This is part of this concrete operational change. I don't know where the glasses are, because the logic's gone and the categories of where you put things is missing. And you see how this goes. And then, the language is so difficult. And depending on where the damage is, like in our case, we have temporal lobe and we see language deficit, mental images. Sometimes this comes out in speech, we don't know to hold back. Right. I mean, I know we talk about the frontal lobe being the lobe with the disinhibition. The reins of the brain are right here. That's TIPA. But we know that all of these stages factor into how we approach and speak. With frontal temporal dementia, we see much more of this and not so much of the other thing. But I would like to, I'll just unilaterally say, so somebody can shoot me down later, going to the sensory motor as we get to those end stages is important. And the first thing to know is the senses are not as acute as they once were. We know that 50% of the people with Alzheimer's can't smell. It's actually a predictive situation. I say that pre-COVID. Now with COVID, it might mean you just had COVID. I don't know. But we know the senses are muted. We know the hearing sense is hugely missing for a lot of our people. And we see that the loss of hearing is related or associated with the likelihood of dementia. So that's frightening. All that being said, we adapt our approach, tailoring. Here we are being the tailor again, right? But by enlisting the music of their preference, finding a volume and a rhythm that is pleasant, that is one way. Another way, we talk about the smell not being there. Well, the doTERRA people have a beautiful study on essential oils. And what they found is that folks who, and I think it was the doTERRA people, forgive me, folks who have lost their sense of smell, the brain is still processing and opening up to those calming smells like lavender. Isn't that fabulous? Because we often said aromatherapy, they can't even smell. Well, they may not be able to smell. They can still be invigorated. They can still be calmed because the brain is somehow processing, even though the actual sense nose is not picking it up. So as we look at how we approach people, I have wonderful information on how this works with games and approach to play. We have to see that this is changing as well. We really are returning to Neverland and upping the Wendy. Wendy needs a counseling degree or something, a Taylor degree. Now, extra added benefit, the moral stages. Kohlberg is a psychologist who looked at the moral development of a child. Of course, it was a limited sample and they were all boys and all that stuff. But I think what's really helpful is looking at the preconventional stage of moral development, 2 to 9 years of age. So that's these two stages. As people are going backwards, right, on the fast scale, and they're getting into the 6s and 7s, aiming at a good reward. Shower pudding. How many times have we heard that? That entice, bait. I mean, that's terrible, but offer a reward. Those things work as other things are declining. And I think it's important because my dear friend upstairs wasn't always loyal to Law and Order. But obviously, personality plays out. But what is very clear in my partnership is that there's a lot of energy right here on being a good boy, to the point where, if I serve him too many, he doesn't like carrots. And I know I shouldn't be serving him. I should be letting him get his own. But if there's too many carrots, he does not get up to get his own dessert unless he finishes his carrots, which is, I mean, minutia, but on the grander scheme of things, it shows me ways to operate, right? It gives me a little bit of support on how to smooth out this path, how to keep the breadcrumbs from getting eaten, for example. So I don't use language like be a good boy. Obviously, we never want to use any of these things to take away dignity of the individual. Never. That's a big taboo. However, I do know what drives him, and it's different than it used to be. The justice and the spirit of the law, these bigger things. And I want to point out post-conventional, it says not all of us get those. That's some adolescents and a few adults. So, if you feel like you're up here, you're doing great. You may want to, I don't know if there's a test to find out where you are. Actually, there was one that was created for this study, but this is a relied upon moral development stage. I offer it because I think it's helpful as we navigate the stages. This late stage, avoiding punishment. This might be, we keep the doors locked so that nobody gets in. Now, I don't want to create fear for any partners out there, but I do want to empower the caregiver, care partner, to have some ability to navigate and have control over keeping our lives safe and maybe happy, right? If we look at stage 3, this is good interpersonal relationships is one of the categories that goes under this good girl, good boy. And this is where the disinhibition yet again shows up, where I don't care that she road rage is an example, or he didn't do it right, so I'm not going to tip him, right? So the interpersonal relationship thing can really fall apart as the moral development declines. And again, some folks never got there. You look at generationally, the the hippie, sorry. I was a borderline hippie, right? I was a late stage hippie. But so some is stronger than others. And then with the changes, you see decline. So when you are right here, you want to be really big on affirmation. Wow, affirmation in touch, sensory, remember the sensory stuff. So holding hands, hugging, whatever else you do, that would be fine. Some of us find intimacy difficult because of the changes we're seeing in our loved one. It's hard to be Tinkerbell when you got to be Wendy, and Wendy probably didn't do that with the boys thinking. But mother touch, mother touch. One of my favorite providers and trainers is Naomi File, and she talks about touch and the mother touch. Those things are important. And when you are doing actual caregiving, some of those mother touches are in shaving or trimming, things that we have to do anyway. But those are ways that we can adapt to this decline on the moral stages. And this may feel like a lot, so we've unpacked a lot already. So let's go play with Snow White and then Rip Van Winkle. Okay, so here we have Snow White, and oh my goodness, she's waiting for her prince. And I'll be honest, and I'm jumping ahead, but I can't help myself. I thought my sweet prince was going to be at Johns Hopkins Neurology. That has not been true. So sometimes we put our hope for an awakening and a solution into a figurehead, and often it is a medical figurehead. And honestly, with over 100 varieties, with very difficult testing, with no real solutions, no medical adaptation solutions, there are a few tricks in the bag. The same tricks are used for many of the 100 plus dementias. So it's not fair to expect that. But yes, I was Sleeping Beauty. And I figured the minute we got off the boat and got good care, this would be, has not been that way. Through no fault of anybody in particular. Through scientific lack of evidence, perhaps. So that's the one thing. But now we go backwards. And I think this lovely young lady, Snow White, and she's not aging a bit. Is that not a miraculous thing? Lying there, sleeping away. And it makes me think of denial. And I have been critical of many people saying, oh, they're just in denial. And, I think I've learned through walking this path, we've been too disparaging of denial. There is some benefit to being denial. It has a purpose. It has a job. Sometimes you need to back away. Sometimes you need to be la, 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 la. Yes, we're going. Yes, we're going. I know it doesn't make sense, but we're going because I want to err on the side of quality of life. And so sometimes I take risk, and, I can't tell you how many providers are like, he's still driving. Well, he keeps passing the test. So yes, he's still driving. So sometimes I think denial has a solid role. You need to be in that fugue state or that dream state. It might be where you're gathering strength. I mean, this lady's going to come out of this like, woohoo, again, with the kiss of a prince. But what you don't want to do is set up camp in here. Denial, you can't just stay in, because this guy, 20 years, missed the Revolutionary War, which was probably positive. How many of us would like to miss this? Yes. Could I wake up on the other side, please? However, we miss all the good things as well. So, and I think about caregiving for someone with dementia. It's got a lot of gambles. Many of the strategies work for some, not for others. Therapeutic fibbing, wonderful. But then every once in a while, the person catches you in it. So it's kind of like we're shotgun approaching. I'm going to throw all this out there, and one of these things is going to work, which puts a lot on us, which means we need more dreams and sleep and denial to be able to manage it. Even the best gambler doesn't stay at the table 24/7. You need to rest. And so I think we need to give a little credit to Snow White. I know it was a poison apple. So our key takeaways is the poison apple made her sleep, and the dwarfs took care of her. So if you know the story of Snow White, which I had to familiarize myself with again, those little 7 dwarfs, they took care of her while she slept. So we need to let others help with this load. And then Rip, he missed too much. He slept for 20 years. We need more balance on things. Yes, it's good to have sleep. It's good to pretend we don't have this for now to get through something. But, the truth of the matter is, if it gets overboard, maybe you need a counselor, maybe you need a coach, maybe you need an antidepressant, maybe you need a massage, maybe you need to have scheduled time away. I don't care if it's walking up and down the store. It doesn't matter to me. But time away makes a difference, and I know that from depriving myself of it. All of these help to manage. And don't let your regret list include your own personal demise. Linda, you and I have sat at caregiving support groups, seeing the same people for years, and hurts to see the changes. It hurts to see the decline. It's palpable, and we know we need to take care of ourselves. So some of this is good. Now let's look at our, you didn't have dwarfs to protect you while you slept. Instead, maybe you felt like Cinderella. Oh, doing all the chores. I mean, whether it's how many carrots you put on a plate, or whether it's suddenly you are the person trying to run the spreadsheet with the finances on it that you have no idea because you've never been spreadsheet friendly. Suddenly you're doing it all. So often I honestly feel like Cinderella. Then the flip side of Cinderella are these amazing stepsisters, always telling her she needed to do it better. How many of us have family and friends that say, well, you just need to, and of course, our list of what we need to do is so long and it doesn't help. That constant do better. And then very unique to the Cinderella story is what is termed in literature the step gap. This is a gap where, and it's a longitudinal study, which is the strongest study. So they looked at caregiving families, and they looked at caregiving families where there was a second or third or fourth marriage. And what they found is step families were far less likely to offer caregiving help compared to the biographical family. So I definitely, being a gerontologist, thought about this before I got married the second time, because I knew that I'd be more on my own. My kids are great at helping me, but they don't have investment in this other situation. They just have investment in me. So that is part of the research. Another part that anecdotally we see again and again and again is it's always the child, step or otherwise, who is furthest away that swoops in a crisis and totally wants to take over and tell you you've done it wrong. These are parts of the journey, and it's unfortunate. And I'm hoping you all have a fairy godmother. It doesn't have to be a mother. It could be a fairy god person. I'm good with that. We all are. Because Cinderella wasn't alone. She felt very alone a lot, and I think we can all relate to that. But this person needs to be objective, with no skin in the game, there for you anytime, with resources to spare. Resources as in, sometimes it can't be another caregiver because there's just too lean, right? So if you can find that, and I would suggest you take a moment and write down who your fairy god person or persons are. And if there are none, then we need to move forward and define your mission, right? So finding your tribe is part of finding your fairy godmother is part. And Linda and I are here if you need a fairy godmother, fairy god person, we're here. The Rumpelstiltskin, I had to look it up because I was getting my Rip and my Rumple mixed up. Rumpelstiltskin is a very interesting story with two missions. So we have, I think he's a miller, Okay, so he grinds wheat. A miller who wants his daughter to marry the king, and the king is looking for a queen, right? So what happens is that the miller does a little of his own therapeutic fibbing, not so therapeutic, and says, when the king asks him, what makes your daughter better? Well, my daughter can take wheat and spin it into gold. What? So that was the miller's mission, was to get his daughter to be queen. Okay, so she, much like us at a diagnosis, she gets to be queen, and all of a sudden she has to make this happen. I think the king locks her in a tower and with full of wheat, like in this picture, and says, okay, I expect to see gold in the morning. Well, that had to be very overwhelming, and I can relate to that. I mean, here I am, the dementia coach, the woman with all this experience. Are you kidding me? I found a mate that has dementia. What is that about? So, but the mission, of course, is to live at this point, because the king's very clear. If she doesn't do this, she's toast. Well, out comes this imp or leprechaun or whatever you want to call him. It depends on which story you read. And he's kind of hanging out, and he's usually smaller, but they made him almost half the size in this lovely illustration. And he says, I will do this for you. I will do this for you. And he does this several times, where he turns the wheat into gold. He's a trickster, though. And along about the third, I think it's 3, usually 3 is the magic number in so many of our stories, he exacts this promise. His mission is to get the firstborn. He wants to take the firstborn of, he will take this wheat and make it into gold one more time, but he expects the firstborn baby so that would be the prince. Well, she's worried sick, right? So we have 2 missions here: the daughter to be queen, and then the imp to get the firstborn. What is very good about this is that our friend, the now queen, has good sharp hearing, and our imp is, well, let's suppose he's low on the morals development scale, and he's low on the childhood development scale, and he's dancing and singing to himself in the fireplace on how he's going to be the king of the world, because he's going to have the prince. And he says his name, and his name is Rumpelstiltskin. Well, the queen, the now queen, hears that, and that's how she saves her baby, is that she is able to tell him his name, because that was the deal. The baby, unless you can tell me my name. And of course, he was silly and said his name. And often we see this in dementia world, where underneath the drive, you can often find what the unmet need is based on something that's said or something that is done. An example is a fellow that just keeps getting out of line at the bank, and he will not stand with the woman, and he keeps heading over to the corner. Well, that person needs to go to the restroom, right? So they often will tell you without words what is needed. And so, that's the story of Rumpelstiltskin. But what is your mission? Her father had a mission, and he was successful. The imp had a mission, not so successful. So we have to ask ourselves, once there's a diagnosis, what is your mission? Are you looking for a long, long life? Are you looking for maybe a shorter life with quality? I don't know. Mission statements come up very important. There's a whole body of research that I based my dissertation on what it takes to make a good dementia special care unit. And what it takes is, one of the elements is a good mission statement. What is your end goal? Do you want to have a good life? Do you want your loved one to have his best life? I'm hoping it's for both of you to have your best life within reason, because we know this diagnosis puts a real monkey wrench into the situation. But weighing that out, that goes back to that balance, right? Weighing out his need and my need. I want to have a good life too. And so that might mean that you will go an extra day to adult daycare, even though you're telling me from the range of a 4-year-old mindset that you don't want to go. The child that's 4 that doesn't want to go to daycare still goes, right? And how do they go? we use those moral development stages, and we're like, when I pick you up, I'll take you out for ice cream. That kind of thing. A little hypothetical there, by the way, but you could do more exacting, gummy bears to get in the car kind of thing. So working with how this is changing and applying it so that we can both have our mission. This goes to having an understanding of what the person's advanced care plan is. What do they want? Are they wanting CPR? One of the best things Empath has and is the Dementia Living Will Extension, something to actually type in Google search, pops right up, and it breaks down the three parts of the changes, and the person gets to choose what they would do if they were in this level of care need. So I may want to be resuscitated at a stage 2 or 3, but I don't want to be resuscitated at a stage 7. These are all ways that we can try to navigate this best life. This also involves, when will you know it's time? Time for whatever is in your mission statement, right? I know Mike and I have been very clear, probably because of my work in memory care all these years, that there will be a time that he will go to memory care. And to be honest, I don't know when that's going to be. The pandemic threw monkey wrenches in a lot of thinking for me. And the trajectory is slow. But there will be, when I listen to my other caregivers, I can't and don't want to do what they are doing. A whole nother series would be, and that's okay, right? A whole nother speaker presentation would be, and that's okay. We weren't all meant to do everything the same way. There is no one right way. Let me repeat that. There is no one right way. There are many ways. It very much is tailored to you and your care partner and your family and your finances, and even what disease is the foot of the day. All those things factor in to not only mission statement, but how that mission statement would be fulfilled. Ideally, the Notebook is a lovely fairy tale, but for me, it'll be a fairy tale because that's not financially feasible. The man had a practical campus. Come on now. And I don't want to die with Mike. I want to outlive him. I'll be honest. So that's all part of that. So figuring it out and being okay with where you are. Because I know at my next visit to the neurologist, I'm going to be very clear that some of the behaviors I need help, and I think it has to be pharmaceutical. Because I don't know how, all this wisdom, and I do not know how to deal with that quick spin up. I know how to walk away. I know how limiting it can be in my life, though, and that's where the rubber meets the road. So we'll have a discussion. Fingers crossed. I may be looking for a handsome prince and may not get one, but fingers crossed we'll have a discussion. So when will you know it's time? When will the next step be? In my case, I'm going to sign up for the senior center and find out what's going on. And now that I'm almost there and probably already there, I can go to the senior center as well. So baby steps here, but sometimes the disease takes over and it's massive steps, gigantic steps, going back to Mother May I imagery, right? So when you have some idea of what's next and when it's time, I really encourage you to share it with someone. What we find in our support groups is sometimes the others say, wait a minute, you said you weren't going to do this. You're still doing this, and we see that it's really hurting you. So sometimes it's helpful to share that with someone. Maybe it's your fairy godmother, has no skin in the game, right? But can say, I think this is really hurting you. I see it. That is really helpful. Now, not to end with anything that's not the best, but the 3 billy goats gruff come to mind, as do the 3 pigs. We've got 3s, lots of 3s, right? So that's all about strength in numbers. And if you know the story of Billy Goat Gruff, there was a troll under the bridge and they needed to get across the bridge. So they kind of strategized together. This is what we do in support groups. We pull none of us are at our worst on the same day. So that is good. Sometimes even the leader gets held up while the others, and we take turns. So there's strength in numbers. Together we can do what we could never do alone. That's from the 12 steps. And it is so true. So the billy goats, first one, and they trick him. Second one, they trick him. Third one challenges the troll, and manages then to slay the troll. And then they have free range on the bridge after that. Equally powerful are the 3 pigs. And if you remember the 3 pigs, big bad wolf, huff and puff and blow your house down, and not by the hair on my chinny chin chin, which always makes me concerned. But so when you look at the 3 pigs, this is why you show up early to things like support groups, to things like educational seminars, to the 3 days of webinar that Linda provides so generously, and all the sponsors are so generous in providing. Because information is power, because yes, the first little pig's house got blown down, because my experience in 1980 with dementia is a world difference in 2022. Because we need to witness what happens if we do it this way, what happens if we do it that way. And if you recall, it was the brick house that stayed up against the huffing and puffing of the big bad wolf, and and they were able to then vanquish. I think he fell into a pot of boiling water. But together is where the power is. Single strand versus 3-strand rope. We know 3 is better, right? So resilience is in gathering together, is in being aware of, educating ourselves on what to look for, as well as taking the time to rest. Maybe that's denial. A lot of risk taking. So we need to have rest to show up for the risk. At least in my case, because I'm very committed to quality of life. It's my driving force. It's my mission statement, quality of life till the end of life. And that might mean the end is faster, and I'm okay with that. So everybody has their own mission statement, not trying to promote mine, but tribal support is very important. Resilience, the ability to get back up and do it again, that's based in that rest. That's sometimes based in that denial. Together we can do better at self-care. We have to rely on that collective wisdom. There is collective wisdom. And then to look for the magic. Yeah, go ahead and eat the gingerbread, but be sure you know how to get back on your self-care path. Honest to Pete, sometimes it takes a Reese's cup. It just does. And yes, there are repercussions, and you may not lose weight as fast as you'd like, but maybe you'll get to take a walk to get back to that balance, right? Or eat more carrots. Maybe that's the challenge and the way to get back. But go ahead and eat it. You need certainly more than breadcrumbs for this. And it's okay to allow your fairy godmother to spoil you. If you have a person that's offering to put you up in her home in St. Petersburg to get away, oh my gosh, please say yes. And I say that knowing I haven't. But let your fairy godmother spoil you. All things in moderation. That's for sleep. That's for denial. You don't set up camp there. I remember a pastor saying the valley of the shadow of death. You walk through the valley, you don't set up camp there. Every one of the fairy tales had some gruesome, in fact, there were some really horrifying iterations because they all were told differently, right? But often and usually there was some saving grace. Don't despair, there is saving grace, and that's what this is about. If I were to compare a caregiver with a dementia diagnosis from 1980, which there were apparently this many, not very many, compared to today, oh my gosh, we're in the land of milk and honey. We have so many resources. So don't despair, find some of those resources and find your tribe. That's your support groups, your memory cafes. That's, taking up a new hobby, doing something virtually. If you can't get out of the house, paint by number. Try to be open to that best in life. And there is a lot of power in the numbers. Find your tribe. They're not all for you. Not all things work for everyone, but we have certainly a lot of choices today that we can grab onto. And this is a beautiful picture of Mike and I. We were a little younger then. I think the chin may be a little bigger on me and his hair is a little whiter. But if you would like to have more tribe mates, certainly Linda, I know you have a calendar of events and activities, journaling, all kinds of creative things. I do as well, catemccarty.com under the calendar section for looking for tribe mates. Linda, thank you so much for having me. It was just delightful to do. And thank you for always being a part of my tribe. You keep the big bad wolf off. Even with the pictures you send, it's just delightful. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for being here today. And I just love that presentation. I think it gives people something to think about.
Yes.
And just to know that we're not alone. We're not alone. So that's all good. Come on, Becky, move over.
Yeah.
All right, Kate, we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you.